Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tamara. Those of you who were at Bankers Life for the Inclusive City announcement last spring are no doubt aware of the new mission that CICF shared at that event. But for those who aren't aware, that mission is, quote, to mobilize people, ideas, and investments to make this a community where all individuals have equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter place, race, or identity, unquote. Mobilizing people, ideas, and investments. Sounds like a movement. Where all individuals have equitable opportunity to reach their full potential. Sounds like a movement for change. So to talk about this change and to reflect on the work done so far, I'd like to welcome Brian Payne and Milt Thompson to join me up here.
Thank you, Vop. I'm Brian Payne, President and CEO of the Central Indiana Community Foundation and President of the Indianapolis Foundation.
And I'm Milton Thompson, Board Chair of the Indianapolis Foundation and inaugural Chair of CICF. Vop, this is a change that people of color have been fighting to move forward for a long, long time. We're not here to talk today, at least not much, but how long it's taken. Could it have gotten here maybe 400 years sooner? Absolutely.
Absolutely, Milt. My personal lack of awareness and my ignorance of systemic racism was a barrier to earlier action, as has the ignorance of much of white America. Now we have to act with urgency to make up for lost time.
One of the things we realized is that we had never really had the conversation, as a community or as an institution, about race, about power, about how power has historically been guarded, and about how it could ideally be shared. So we started having those conversations. They're not easy ones. They require honesty, vulnerability, a willingness to deal with some of the unflattering truths.
Brian, you spoke last year about looking at the changes CICF has helped to make and your realizations about the people who've been left out. So what's come of that?
Well, we've renewed our efforts to gather input from those we haven't heard from, and in some cases, have never been in relationship with. And we realize that while our community has changed for the better over the years, many people are still being left behind. We know there is a growing gap between the affluent and poor in Central Indiana, that the chances of making it out of poverty are slim, and the chances of doing better than your parents are decreasing. Simply put, the American dream, which I've also learned isn't even a concept in many black families, the American dream is getting more impossible for more people. And of course, we learned that race has a profound impact on opportunity. We realized that we wanted to truly address these inequities in our community, we would need to dismantle systemic racism in Central Indiana. And we've learned that white people created these racial systems, and it is largely up to white people who have a disproportionate amount of power to own this truth and to fix and dismantle these systems. But the work must also be in collaboration with people of color who've become the experts through lived experiences on the harm these systems do to all of America. So what can white leaders do? That is a theme we'll be exploring throughout this program.
Our vision has been for CICF to become an anti-racist, multicultural organization, and for our community of Central Indiana to become and be recognized as an anti-racist community.
Here's what we've seen from City County Council. Over the past year, CICF has supported racial equity training for nearly every member of the council and more than 40 members of the mayor's office. Those trainings have changed the way we look at everything we do as city government, from city services and economic development to health and safety.
That training is provided by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, a national network of local and regional governments. It's not just about the habits and attitudes of individuals, though that definitely is a part of it. It also dives deeper into programs, policies, and institutional strategies that create and perpetuate inequities.
Exactly. What's been understood through these racial equity trainings, and all of us at CICF have done similar ones, is that it goes way beyond whether one white person is nice to one black person. It's about acknowledging that the power of white people and that of white supremacy culture has been foundational to the systems that make up our community. Systems like philanthropy and city government. Every system. We need to change the ways we operate in order to create true inclusiveness and opportunity for our black neighbors, for our Latinx neighbors and indigenous neighbors, and every individual in our community whose voice, needs, and very humanity have been ignored. We at CICF have been far from perfect, but we have been learning from our mistakes. We have learned that many of us have shown our white fragility and have defaulted back to bad habits that are not inclusive and do not have equitable access to opportunity. In fact, we postponed this event from its original date in late August because we at CICF needed to do more work internally before we could stand before you.
During the past year and a half, our board leadership and staff at CICF have been reflecting on what we've learned and how we can move forward with greater insight and determination.
It is a process. We're just beginning it. We recognize that this commitment to dismantle systemic racism is a generational commitment, but we are excited and hopeful about the progress that we make every day and the progress that has been made so far. But enough for me. Let's hear from some of my colleagues with whom I've had the great honor of doing this work by their side.
My reaction of CICF's mission when it changed its mission was that the mission is very bold, but I also think it's heroic. It's something that needed to happen.
Initial reaction when this change first happened was really a mix. It was a mix of excitement, a mix of awe, a mix of disbelief, and also, it just included I want to join that work.
My initial reaction was, how the heck are we going to do this? And I remember scanning the room of the all-staff meeting to see what other people's facial reactions were. And I immediately thought, wow, this is big and I get to be a part of it.
When we started this equity journey, I have to say that I clearly didn't know what I didn't know. And I really was one of those privileged white people that thought of racism really in terms of individual acts of racism and good people versus bad people. I didn't think of it in terms of systems.
Never have I been able to openly, publicly discuss issues of race and racial equity. I've always done it personally, but never as a part of my job. So to have a job and a career where racial equity work is primarily a part of what you do and looking at things from an equity lens is fantastic.
I'm not usually one to speak up or say anything to disagree, but really being able to work alongside my colleagues and see how much this has impacted the Black and Brown community. So whenever I see something now, whether my friends say something or family members say something, I feel a lot more poised to, engage in that conversation.
It's made me ask and analyze what I've been taught and how I've been programmed. And so it's made me ask questions about, how do I perpetuate how do I perpetuate anti-Blackness? What do I do to perpetuate some of these systems?
The last few months specifically, they've changed the way that we talk about race in our household, the way that we address it with our children, our decision-making processes on where we live and how we live there, and even on things like our consumer behavior.
In collaboration with my colleagues, we were able to incorporate the equitable principles within the Neighborhood Relief Fund, which was a response to COVID.
As a community leadership officer, starting relationships with organizations that aren't usually at the table.
We completely eliminated our fund minimum for our donor advised fund.
A win that I celebrate is kind of a recent win. I've always had trouble finding my voice in my department, and there were things about our work that I wanted to question that didn't know how to verbalize. And when I finally did speak up and I sent the email, it has really changed our conversations as a whole department in a very positive way.
Transformed. The things that I've learned in the last 18 months have changed the way that I think about the world, the way that I live, the way that I act.
Inception, and that, it was the very first ripple in what I hope to be thousands of ripples.
Empowerment, just because even though there are days that are really difficult with everything that's going on, it's really given me hope that this work is being done.
Persistent, and that we must continue to persist in this work. We are just at the beginning of this journey.
It's intentional. And I've heard it said on a number of calls and meetings lately that speed is the enemy of equity. And I think that's important to note because so often we feel the pressure to act quickly or move quickly and try to get that quick win. But to do this work well is to do it with intentionality. So we're in it for the long haul. It was a 400 years before we got here, and we're not in it for the quick wins. We're in it for the long game and for sustainable change in the communities.
What I hear in these stories, and I hope you heard it too, is a fierce desire to figure this out together. I'd like to welcome Tamara Winfrey Harris back with us, as well as Pamela Ross, our CICF Vice President of Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion. Welcome back, Tamara, and welcome, Pamela.
Thank you, Brian Payne. I think our colleagues' stories also speak to a point that I always try to make when I'm approaching this, whether it's with city leaders, not-for-profit organizations, but especially at CICF. And that is, anti-racist learning can be supported through reading books, podcasts, and participating in equity trainings. But the work is so much deeper than that. The vulnerability and honesty required to make true change can be just as messy as it is impactful, so be ready. The changes we're talking about making are real. They need to happen right now, and they need to be happening inside of our organizations and our institutions.
Pam, how would you say these types of changes have influenced our work at CICF?
Well, as a community foundation, we're charged with ensuring our grants make as much impact as possible in the communities we serve. Whether we're talking about housing or food security or placemaking or any of the other areas we're investing, we've always taken pains to make impact go as far as possible. What we're doing differently now is we're being laser focused about how we do the work and the organizations we're partnering with. We have learned to give greater value to the time and intentionality it takes to develop real and very authentic relationships. It's no longer about simply doing good work in the community, but also assessing whether or not the work that you are doing is truly aligned with our mission and how the voices of the people most impacted are heard. Whether the issue we're talking about is hunger or eviction or beautification or neighborhood safety. We have to work just as hard for impact and relationships as we do for outcomes.
Outcomes for our investments in grant making are still incredibly important. In addition to building new relationships and strengthening existing ones, we'll continue to support our ongoing initiatives to increase the quality of life in Central Indiana for all while we work on our goal to become an anti-racist community. And we're inviting our fund holders to join us in this journey, and we will also continue providing support to our fund holders as they fulfill their own philanthropic vision. Applying an equity lens to all our work is essential to increase the quality of life for all Central Indiana.
That is so right, Tamara.
I think a perfect example of that is the work we've been doing over the past 6 months as CICF has responded to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. What we've seen is that COVID essentially preys on those affected by systemic racism. The CDC has looked at COVID deaths for people under 65. The rate of death is twice as high among people of color as it is for white people. And for young people in this country who have died from COVID, now we're talking here about those under age 21, 78% were children of color. That's a staggering figure. Both the virus and the economic impacts that followed hit our most vulnerable communities, including many of our Black and Latinx neighbors, very hard and very quickly.
But because we are already focused on how systemic racism often amplifies impacts around health and income security, we saw this coming and we acted on it. In mid-March, when the city largely shut down, we decided to create the Neighbor Relief Fund in Marion County, all about COVID relief and all about addressing the needs of the most vulnerable neighbors. And we also had the Hamilton County Community Foundation, the Women's Fund of Central Indiana, and many of our other funds join in that commitment. We also joined a larger institutional relief fund with the Lilly Endowment, Eli Lilly and Company, the Nina May Symposium Charitable Trust, Fairbanks Foundation, and the United Way in the creation of the Central Indiana COVID-19 Community Economic Relief Fund. We made these decisions inside the span of a week. The Indianapolis Foundation decided to move $250,000 into one fund and $250,000 into another in partnership with the Glick Fund. The Hamilton County Community Foundation and the Women's Fund of Central Indiana also moved incredibly quickly and dedicated significant dollars to relief funds.
And Brian, we both know not-for-profits do not usually move that fast.
It was by far the fastest we have ever moved.
Brian, over the past few months, you've shared with many of us an article by an Indian writer, Arundhati Roy, that talks about pandemics throughout history and how each of them has historically been a portal from the past world to the next world. What about this idea resonated with you so strongly?
Well, I love this metaphor, and I could talk about this for a long time, but we don't have that much time today. I will say that the key thing is the question of, what do you take with you through the portal into the new world? She suggests that we all pack lightly. Do not bring lots of baggage from the old world. Don't insist upon bringing your old ways and habits. A lot of the stuff from the old world isn't worth taking. The systems that keep white people disproportionately in power and keep Black and brown people down, let's leave those behind. Ms. Roy says that let's be flexible and adaptable in the new world and fight like hell for what is right.
When it comes to new ideas, we've been getting a lot of great ones from neighbors in the communities we've been working with, especially when it comes to providing relief from the effects of the pandemic.
Next, we'll hear from where we've gotten some of the greatest ideas from our community ambassadors. We'll hear them talk about how they've been responding to the COVID pandemic, the crisis that it brings, the continued systems of oppression in their neighborhoods, but still finding joy in the midst of it all. Here's a video produced by one of our very own community ambassadors, Tedrick Hardy.
I'm Annie Smith, and I represent the far east side of Indianapolis as a community ambassador. I have been doing this work in this community for forever, over 30 years, definitely. I'm very passionate about this work, and I will continue to do it until I can't do it anymore. There's a lot of joy and engaging with residents who are very passionate about, having a better quality of life. And if I can be a part of that, working alongside of them, then that makes me happy. We need agencies, and we need to all be working together. that is what brings about real solutions to the problem. We are so accustomed to outside folks coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do for your neighborhood, for your area, but having resident voice and working alongside residents and having the resources to invest in our community, that's what solves real issues.
My name is Valerie Davis, and I live in St. Clair Place neighborhood, and I represent the Near East Side. When I first came over here, I was homeless. So the reason I got involved, sorry, I get teary sometimes, is because I needed something to do. And all the meetings and community meetings and neighborhood meetings and everything I went to was all white. And it just kind of like pissed me off because I didn't understand, because we were here in this neighborhood and we were never afforded a chance to come to the meetings. If you're not at the table, you don't get the information. So I started coming to the meetings, and I started just being involved. Even though these agencies over here do help a lot of people, they still need to be accountable. I'm coming from a place of a Black single woman that struggled on the Near East Side, and right is right, is wrong is wrong.
My name is Beatrice Beverly, and I represent the Martindale-Brightwood area. I've been doing this work for a very long time. I can remember being a little girl growing up and going to church, and our mom would always have us volunteer and always have us do service work in our community, and it was just something that was ingrained. So it's necessary. People need to know that people will show up for them. They will show up for them from a place of love. They will show up for them from a place of respect and honor. They will show up for them when they're not at their best. People will still show up. The agencies are the residents that live within the communities, and they have gifts and they have talents and they have contributions that they give every single day, every single day.
Well, my name is Rosalind Pinky Sanford. I am Crooked Creek Community Ambassador. I represent the Crooked Creek Community Neighborhood, which is Washington Township. It's not one single person in my neighborhood that I walk past and they don't feel like they got a personal relationship with me, and that's because I've engaged in some form of conversation. Just taking the time out to acknowledge people next to you so everybody can feel like they, you know,
they matter.
Yeah, they matter. You know, you can't just take somebody that went to school, fed, school clothes, all that. You can't just take a regular, like what you would expect out of life to be person and put them out here to help nobody, because they don't know how to help nobody. They ain't been through nothing. What you do is you get people like me. Mm-hmm. People in my neighborhood are me. You know what I'm saying? That's why I live around them, because we can relate to each other.
How you doing? My name is Tedrick Hardy. I'm a CICF ambassador representing the Hallville community. I think I've been doing this work in my community since I've been born, but as far as documenting, we started the Land Park Project about 4 or 5 years ago. Something we do every Sunday in Hallville, Sunday Fun Day, where we bring the whole community together, free food, free resources, games, a lot of laughs and giggles, and just a lot of coming together. So I continue to do this work, first of all, because I love it. Second of all, it's because it's me. You know what I mean? This is the community I'm from, born and raised, my whole family. It's all I know, so why would I stop?
The ability to get real-time feedback from community development practitioners has been really important, as the ambassadors come to each meeting with ideas, and they are by and large really good ideas. And so that helps us sort of leave those meetings with a little bit of a homework assignment to think about how do we take what we've heard and turn it into action. I've seen the results of generations worth of decisions by people who looked like me. And we are in a different time. And it's a time when we have to recognize the impact of those decisions that have been made over the last 100 years. And those of us who are in roles of perceived or real authority that have control over the levers of city government or the purse strings of city government, we have to listen, and we have to not just listen, but act on what we hear.
As we do this work, it's important to think holistically, to remember that we're not just a city of neighborhoods, but an entire region of people, and that the change we look to make is for everyone, across boundaries of race, gender, and geography. As all Central Indiana communities manage through this pandemic and this racial reckoning happening throughout our nation, as we grapple with how we will move through this portal into the new world, these changes we see ahead affect everyone. People who are black and brown and white, people in Indianapolis, people living in Hamilton County, people who identify as male and female and non-binary, people who identify as LGBTQ, and people with disabilities. What affects one of us truly does affect us all. What if we created a community in this new world where every person could truly be their authentic self and be supported to have the opportunity to reach their full potential? I'd like to introduce Jennifer Pope Baker, President of the Women's Fund of Central Indiana, and Tom Killian, President of the Hamilton County Community Foundation, for a reflection of their work this past year.
Women's Fund of Central Indiana is deeply engaged in CICF's commitment to end systemic racism. As we strive to be an anti-racist organization, we are shining a light in spaces where women of color have been silenced, underappreciated, and ignored. We are lifting up Black women by listening to their voices, giving them recognition, and welcoming them at our table. We are engaging Black women in our leadership and our decision-making. We are advocating for equity and inclusion. We are actively participating in dismantling racist systems. We know in order to best serve women and girls in our community, we must have a broad diversity of people making decisions, as this chips away at inherent bias and begins moving closer to equity. Our board and committees are all co-chaired by at least one woman of color, and our committees are at least 50% women of color. We have created a new position with leadership and decision-making authority, and we are specifically recruiting to add diversity to our staff. We have a commitment to supporting organizations that serve women in a culturally competent way and address the trauma caused by racist systems. We are at a tipping point in America, and if things are finally going to change, it will take all of us, especially the white community, to use our inherent privilege and power for good. Women's Fund is committed to being a leader in this space, and I am committed to doing the same.
Last year, Hamilton County Community Foundation joined CICF in our commitment to creating a more equitable community with our shared mission. We knew real change wasn't going to happen overnight and realized that we would need to look both internally and externally. Internally, our board, staff, and committees continue to engage in numerous workshops and discussions centered on white fragility, the history of race in our country and our own community, as well as our implicit bias. And this year, our board unanimously approved the creation of an Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee with the charge to hold the foundation accountable for equitable policies and practices. Externally, we vowed not to be silent in the face of injustice. When the tragic murder of George Floyd rocked our nation, we addressed the racial injustice in this country and our own community, and once again pledged our commitment to making Hamilton County a more equitable place. We acknowledge that going through workshops and speaking out is only a small step in the process of creating a more equitable Hamilton County. We know that action is fundamental to sparking real change. Our strategic plan specifically addresses equity throughout Hamilton County, with a specific focus on inclusive economic growth. We know that as our communities throughout the county continue to grow, so too does the need to support equitable access to affordable housing, pathways to long-term employment, and countywide connectivity for everyone. Additionally, we are funding and supporting organizations who are committed to opportunity, equity, and inclusion in our communities. Organizations like Noblesville Diversity Coalition and Faith in Indiana for their local racial equity, community organizing. We are not the same Hamilton County that we once were. Our population is growing and quickly changing. And frankly, that excites me. We have a long journey ahead of us, but I'm so proud of the transformation we have undergone this far. And I look forward to continuing this crucial work and creating lasting change in our Hamilton County communities.
Hello, I'm Greg Hahn, Board Chair of CICF. And with me today is our Vice Chair and soon-to-be CICF Board Chair, Marisol Sanchez. We're happy to have so much to report about that's already been done in the year and a half since we began this effort. But we know we have to keep on going. We cannot rest.
Thank you, Greg. That's right. We can't rest. That's why today we renew our promise to keep adding to the inclusive city we're in the process of building. We will remain bold in our words and our actions, but we will also remain humble and collaborative in our approach. While we've been preparing for this work for over 3 years, we know we still have so much to learn and more trust to be built across our community.
We know that relationships are key to what is going to move and sustain this work. Listening to, learning from, and honoring those who lived experiences in the areas that we're trying to change is paramount. This takes time and patience, and we commit to that in order to be authentic. I want to acknowledge and publicly commend my board member colleagues at CICF, the Indianapolis Foundation, Hamilton County Community Foundation, and Women's Fund, who have universally made this commitment. And of course, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to every single staff member who works tirelessly and with incredible passion and commitment to the ultimate goal of dismantling systemic racism in our region. And Brian, thank you so much for your leadership.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Brian, and to all of our partners. And as I prepare to be chair of the CICF board in 2021, I want everyone to know that our commitment to communities of color will remain strong. And as we indicated before, we're not stopping there. We're going to expand our reach and more fully engage the Latinx community and other communities, including the LGBTQ, Asian American, Native American, and others, in this work as well. These efforts have already begun. The Latinx population is one of the fastest growing populations in Indiana. With that is a growth of young, passionate leaders who, along with their families, want to see our community thrive, who want to be engaged, and who call Central Indiana home. We need to find ways to be more intentional in including them in the conversation and providing opportunities so that together we can leverage diverse thought leadership and create a more inclusive and welcoming city. Unfortunately, Latinos are no strangers to stereotypes or misperception of what the Latino community really is. For instance, did you know that there are over 22 Spanish-speaking countries in the world, each with their own traditions, cultures, and customs? While our language may unite us, there are many differences within our own diverse community. As Greg said a minute ago, we pledge to create authentic relationships with the Latinx community by listening to, learning from, and engaging you in this work and better understand those differences, the needs and the changes that need to occur. Our commitment is to be more intentional in these efforts to strengthen our collective voices and actions to affect positive change. It's extraordinarily important, even as we talk about all of the problems we need to solve and the challenges we need to face, that we keep our vision and the language we use to address it positive, so that the next generation in Central Indiana, those who will inherit our legacy and benefit from our hard work, understand their value and their potential and feel empowered to keep this journey moving forward. On behalf of the CICF Board of Directors, Greg and I thank you.